get started, I'd like to welcome everyone today to our webinar being presented by Melissa Forziat, and this is Smart Principles of Marketing Messaging today. And glad that you're able to join us. We have the chat feature on, and you can ask questions, but during the presentation, it's usually best to hold questions until Melissa gives you the, does anyone have a question? Or at the end, depending on how the material is being presented. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Melissa in just a second. I'm with the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We are a division of the University of Arkansas, and we work with small businesses all across our region. If you have interest in starting a business or growing your business, please do give us a call or visit our website at sbtdc.uart.edu, and we can get with you and assess your needs and then assign you to the consultant who could best help you. But let's go ahead and get started today. So I'd like to introduce Melissa, and you can take over. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate that. And a huge thank you to Julie and to Mary Beth for always having me come back. I don't know how many presentations we've done together at this point. It's been quite a few, but today we're going to talk about smart principles of marketing messaging. For those familiar names who are on the call, welcome back. And for those who haven't seen me speak before, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on me so you have some sense of what I'm bringing into this presentation and why I'm presenting this material the way that I am. So I actually started out in my career doing major international sport events. I worked Olympic Winter Games, I worked Rugby World Cup, I worked with the US Olympic Committee. I started with these huge brands that were operating at a very big scale. And then over at least a dozen years ago now, I started my own business and I began working with mostly small businesses and nonprofits. And so for me, it was a question of how do you take those great principles of marketing that I learned at that very big scale, and how do you make them work for businesses like yours or mine that don't necessarily have those same resources, but we still have to figure out how to get in front of our audience and be effective. So this presentation is very much about looking at some of those principles and thinking about which ones you can take and sort of adapt for your business. For me, this is a really fun presentation. It really taps into all different kinds of little psychological tips and tricks that you could potentially implement in your business. Not everyone is going to be for every business, but hopefully you'll see a couple along the way that get you thinking and get you thinking about how to adapt what you're doing or just even slightly tweak it. So that is something to consider there. I will be giving, even though, probably most of us are micro businesses that are going to be on this call today, you're going to see me give a lot of examples that are corporate examples because they're recognizable. And I think you can still take a lesson from that, even if you don't have the same size of business. But sometimes it helps to see these principles represented in companies that you've heard of or examples that you've actually seen unfold before your eyes. So this is a very example heavy presentation and a very psychologically focused presentation. And if that's the kind of thing that you're into, you are in for a treat. If you find that kind of thing fun like I do, we're going to have some fun for the next hour. So a few quick housekeeping items before we jump in. This is a great time to minimize distractions on your end if you have any that you can minimize. So if your ringer is on your phone, if you have a messaging device on in the background, this is a good time to shut those things down, because the more you think about this material in the context of your business, the more you'll get out of it in real time. Now, if you find that there are slides that you want to take back with you, please know that there actually is an entire slide deck. And in fact, there are additional resources that I've put onto a landing page of my own website. I'll be giving that link to you at the end, and I believe Julie also has that. The only thing that's not going to be on that page is the recording from today, because Julie's working on that on her end. So we'll get all the material to you in one way, shape, or form. But if you feel like you're really rushing to take notes, just know that you are going to be able to get this information back to you, and maybe you can process it a little bit more completely at your pace later. In terms of questions, Julie started to address this. So first of all, I'm going to be posing some questions to you at various moments as we go along. So if you ever see a question come up on the screen, I encourage you to jump into the chat and answer it there. And it helps me sort of gauge how this material is landing, what your businesses are like, and sometimes that helps me adapt what I'm saying as well in real time. So this is a really good opportunity to make sure we all know where the chat is and how that works. Feel free to go check out where the chat is on your screen, open it up, make sure it's set to everyone so that we can all see your messages, and feel free to introduce yourself. I've introduced myself. This is a great time for you to introduce yourself. So feel free to share the name of your business, what you do. Who knows, maybe you'll find another business that's also attending this that would be a good collaborator for you. So I encourage you all to let me know who you are, let each other know who you are. So in terms of questions, I will pose questions to you sometimes. And if you have questions, I do encourage you to save those towards the end. I'll save time for questions at the end to make sure that we're addressing things that are most specifically related to your business. So make a note of those as we go along. If you do put a question in the chat as we're going through, I may or may not see it. So just be aware of that up front. And as people start to introduce themselves, hello to everybody who's here. And here's how we're going to approach this today. So again, this is an hour time slot for this presentation. We're going to start really with an overview. We're going to talk about 6 SMART principles of marketing messaging that I think is just a good broad umbrella to put everything else from this presentation under. Then we're going to look at a few of these areas specifically. We're going to talk about showcasing what your brand represents. We're going to talk about capturing and also holding your audience's attention. We're going to look at, very briefly, putting your message where your target market is. And then lastly, we'll talk about repetition and patterns and getting into people's long-term memory, not just their short-term memory. So there's a lot of material in here, and we're going to dance across it fairly quickly, but hopefully everybody hears something or a couple things along the way that feel immediately relevant to your business. Okay, so are you in the right place? This material is for you. First of all, if you want to know what message your brand needs to send to attract your audience, to bring them in to begin with, but it's not enough just to know that. You also want to know how to hold their attention of that right audience to make sure that they're staying with you for a little bit longer so that you can get into their long-term memory. So we're going to talk about tactics for both of those things. Okay, I think I've set this up enough. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about SMART principles of marketing messaging. So first things first, we want to start with an overview of what those principles actually are. So let's go through them. The first one, and honestly, this is probably the most critical one, which is why it's number 1. Focus on your customer, which may sound like an obvious and simple thing to say, but I often find that small business marketers in particular don't do that. And so sometimes the simplest answer to any question people ask me is, well, what would your audience think about this? This happens a lot for me. People will come up to me after a presentation. They'll say, what do you think of my business card? And I'll ask any question. I'll ask, oh, why did you pick the color green? And they'll say, because I liked it. And it's not about what you like. It's about what resonates for your audience. And then within that, what do you like? So it's really something that we get away from quite a bit when we're focused on our own business. But if you can just remember, what is this actually saying to my audience? Sometimes it helps flip your mindset a little bit so that you can evaluate your marketing choices a little bit more clearly. Now, showcasing what your brand actually represents is another important principle here. You know, when you've made decisions about what your business is, what it stands for, what you want to say to people, you actually really want to make sure that's being represented. Sometimes there is a disconnect. People will make choices about things they think their brand stands for. And then when it actually comes to representing it visually or with words, sometimes the stuff that they decided in the beginning goes out the window. You really want to hold true to those decisions that you made early on about what it is you're trying to say to people. And if you haven't made those decisions yet, it's definitely time to make them, because that way you can be sure that that stuff is infusing into all the marketing that you're putting out there. Now, another important principle, of course, is you have to capture your customers' attention. Your marketing is only as good as you actually getting it in front of people and having them like register it in their brains for even a second, right? So you want to make sure that it's not just stuff you're spraying out there, but stuff that actually gets them to take a moment and look at it. But then even there, you want to make sure that you can have their attention for as long as possible, because it is a first step for them to make a quick decision of, do I want to read this or do I want to pay attention to this? But the longer they stay with it, the more decisions they make to continue looking at or hearing your marketing, the more likely they are to remember it and act on it later. So it's maybe more than a two step process for the person who's receiving it, because they might end up making multiple decisions within a 10-second time span of how much they want to stick with your message. Within 30 seconds, 1 minute, they're making there are more decision points along the way. But for us, it's important just to say, we're getting their attention to begin with, and now how are we going to hold their attention? A fifth important principle, of course, is put your message where your target market is. You can capture an audience's attention and hold their attention, and they could still not be the right people for what you're selling. So it's ideal for us to make sure we're actually getting the message in front of people who would be most likely to be interested to buy what we're selling. And so it takes a little thought to know where those people are going to be. We'll look at that a little bit as well today. And then lastly, and this one's really important, be consistent. And it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but a lot of marketers resist this. They'll say, you know what? I feel like they're going to get tired of this. I've been saying the same thing over and over. I feel like I need to spice it up. These are the things that I hear from small business marketers who start to get really self-conscious that they're getting in front of people too much with the same exact thing. And if you feel that way, I'm hoping today we can switch your mindset on that a little bit, because repetition is your friend, because it starts to create patterns in your audience's brain, and those patterns are what get into their long-term memory. So the more consistent you are with what your message is, the more likely they're actually going to remember it later. And by remembering it later, they might actually do something about it. So as much as so many people I talk to feel resistant to this particular principle, stick with it, because that's the stuff that really works for people. And I think when we get to sort of the last module of this, you'll have some examples that help bring this home for you. But for now, just know consistency is your friend. Okay, let's get into some of these in more depth. So first of all, we want to talk about showcasing what your brand actually represents in your marketing. So, there are a couple different tools that you have as a marketer that are important for setting the foundation of your brand. And the first one is values. If you've seen me present before, this might seem like a familiar thing to talk about, because values, and the next one we're going to talk about tone, they're very important tools that you have that help set the direction of all of the marketing that you're doing. They just set a foundation for it. So values are the guiding principles of how your business operates. This is how you're going to show up to the world over and over again, not only in how you deliver your products and services, but also in how you talk about them and how you market them, and in the customer service that you do as well. So, there are some values words on screen here, but there are so many available to you to consider. It's really about saying, how is my business going to do business with people? And this is the type of thing that gets overlooked a lot. People very often, when they're creating a website, they'll say, okay, what are the values that I need to put on my website? And then they'll forget about them. But this is really an everyday thing for your business. This is how you're going to show up. So, values can be something that creates loyalty in your audience and can differentiate your business from competitors in your market and help people understand, oh, yours is the business that I want to patronize, that I want to frequent. So, as an example of this, let's talk about Apple. You know, for a long time, Apple has stood for innovation. There might be slightly different words you can put into that same space, but to me, it's all about like being different, being forward looking, being innovative. And they've had taglines like think different. They've implemented that innovation in their packaging and their design. They've implemented it in how they serve their customers. Even now, I would say that they're implementing it in programming that they put out there. So they found a lot of different ways for innovation to be at the core of what they do. And one thing that you may realize about the people who love Apple products or services is that they are, I found an incredible loyalty among some of those people to this particular brand. Even if what they're paying for is more expensive, they might still have loyalty because they like the way that Apple does business. And of course, Apple's had a lot of changes over time in terms of leadership, but nonetheless, this is still a value that they've assigned to their brand long term. So, something to consider there, let me just throw this question back to you before we move on. Have you defined your company values? Is this something that you've actually looked at for your business? If you have, or if you haven't, and you're on with me live, feel free to put your thoughts in the chat here. It's helpful for me just to get a sense of, you know, what people have done of the things that I'm presenting today. Like, where are you on this spectrum of having it figured out versus still working on these details? So feel free to jump in, before we move on, and let me know, is this something that you've actually looked at for your business before? Do you have clarity on what this is for your business? And, as you're starting to respond on that, we will prepare to move on to talk about sort of a close cousin of values, which is tone. But it looks like, I'm starting to get some responses in here. Sandy saying accessibility and inclusion are important values. Okay, and that definitely gives you, in fact, for those for accessibility, for example, there are sometimes very clear legal parameters around how you need to show up in different spaces. So depending on what your values are, sometimes there's more of a prescripted definition of how you get there than in other cases. I think in Sandy's case, there is sometimes more legal rules around that particular value, but it doesn't need to be that way. Sometimes there are values that, like timeliness or, punctuality. That's something that, is just a general principle that you can adhere to that doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of like legality around it. So, okay, so as those thoughts start to come in, if you've defined your company values, sometimes the thing that you're missing is the piece of tone, but it's a really important piece to go hand in hand with values. And to me, they're cousins of each other. It's not the same thing, but they're related in a certain way. So when you think about tone, this is your style of communication. Let's say it's how your voice sounds. And I don't just mean if you're speaking, it could mean in writing. There, tone can come across in a variety of different ways. Tone has a lot of power to create loyalty in an audience. So you're going to see on screen here some examples of tone words. There are so many more. Even some of these words have a lot of different shades to them, like humor. There are a lot of different kinds of humor. Tone gets really interesting when you can mix different tone words together and think, well, how can I be both of these things at the same time? And what does that sound like to people? And this is the kind of thing that you don't want to overlook this one, because think about people in your own world that you follow. Think about who your favorite, if you have any talk show hosts you like, or newspaper columnists, or authors, or whatever, or maybe there are certain friends or family members that you tend to go to when you have certain questions that you want to ask. You could get the same information from so many other people, and maybe you do. Maybe you look at a variety of different sources, but you're always going to come back to this person because you like the way they talk about the thing. And so that goes to show you what loyalty can look like in tone and how that can create loyalty for you, it can do the same thing for your audience. So making decisions about tone can be really powerful and impactful in helping to call in the people who want to be spoken to that way. Ideally, the tone is going to match up with how you'll actually speak to people if they're right in front of you or if you're serving them in your business. So, as an example, I want to give you a couple examples for this so that you can get a sense of it. First of all, I don't know if you remember this commercial. There was this extra gum commercial that it's gum, right? It's gum. Extra, however, made this whole really emotionally driven commercial. They created like this amazing love story in an advertisement. And these are some screenshots. They actually depict sort of the life cycle of this relationship, and it was being drawn on gum wrappers the whole time. And so they connected their product in with it. They had this beautiful cover of I Can't Help Falling in Love with You by Haley Reinhart. It's a it's gum, right? I think we can all acknowledge it's gum. It's not that deep. But they leaned in like this and they made it something that was like, this gum will be with you through all the major moments in your life. And for a while, this is sort of the bedrock that they were basing their marketing on. And so they went with a really specific tone on this, and I want to show you a very different example here. Cards Against Humanity might be the opposite in many ways of what you thought of with the extra commercial. I would say Cards Against Humanity leads into the offensively humorous angle. You can see it from their packaging, you can see it from the way they market. Unlike most of the party games you've played before, Cards Against Humanity is as despicable and awkward as you and your friends. There was a time in their website for FAQs that said your dumb questions. If you like their marketing, you'll probably like their game. If you don't like their marketing, you probably won't like their game. They kind of weed in the people who would be right for their product and weed out the people who wouldn't right from their marketing. And in doing so, they probably minimize customer complaints, returns, if people ever try to return board games, I don't know, or card games. But they might have to deal with more of that backlash in their marketing. But at the same time, they can always say, like, okay, well, then don't buy the game. The game isn't right for you. But the people who love the marketing, they know right away, this is the game that I need to get. So very different tone from what we saw with Extra. But you can see how important tone can be in filtering the right people in. Another example, I want to give a few examples on spokespeople. Now, if the smaller a business is, the less likely you are to actually think in official terms like spokesperson. Really big companies will often set a specific spokesperson or have more than one spokespeople who are meant to be public facing. A lot of times that'll be the CEO or a communications manager. The certain people who are designated as being the people who are meant to represent a company. But when your company is smaller, you might be the spokesperson. So think of yourself in that official capacity. And I wanted to show you a few examples of the power that tone and values can have when reflected in a specific human representing a company. So here, you may remember this is from quite some years back. I think it was like 2016 that Morgan Freeman was brought on with Waze to basically be the voice of giving people traffic directions. And you can kind of picture why that would be the case, right? Like Morgan Freeman has always been known for having this voice with so much it's very calm. There's all this gravitas. It's like that is the voice you want guiding you to your destination, especially if you're a nervous traveler or an anxious traveler. And so this was a pairing that was made. Waze was taking advantage of a whole aura that Morgan Freeman had around him. People had all this history with what they understood about Morgan Freeman and his voice, and Waze wanted to leverage that. And so they created this partnership. What's interesting is that spokespeople can be like a company saying, I want to take this person's already formed brand and join it with my own, or it could be something like this where they create it. Geico has put a lot of effort into this gecko, haven't they? I mean, this mascot has been built from the ground up, has been through all kinds of adventures in my lifetime. It's this gecko has a personality. But the thing is, it's an interesting comparison because when Waze partnered with Morgan Freeman, they instantly got everything that Morgan Freeman had already built up in terms of his reputation. But they had no control over Morgan Freeman in terms of what he did outside of his contract with Waze, right? So if he then did a project that didn't completely align, or if he did something in his personal life that didn't completely align, that's his choice, right? They can't control him. Geico probably had to put a monumental amount of effort into getting us to associate this gecko with their company. But once they finally got that across the line, once there became this recognizable atmosphere about it, they now can completely control what this spokes gecko does for their company. So they will never have a moment where this gecko does something that's a little off brand for them because the whole thing was built from the ground up. One more example that may feel more relatable. I don't know who here has seen the movie Joy. If you haven't, if you're a small business owner, this is definitely a movie that's worth putting on your watch list. And, Joy is all about Joy Mangano and her rise on, home shopping footage, where we get to this point in the movie where she's trying to sell her mop on QVC. And at the time, the way the movie shows that QVC was using a lot of celebrity spokespeople to sell products, but it wasn't really working with the mop. And so, in a turning point moment in the movie, Joy decides, I'm going to be the one to sell this mop live. And she does. And it works out. And the reason it works out is that she was able to take a neighborly, relatable tone. She was able to say, I'm a mom with kids. I have to mop all the time. And here's what I love about mops. And here's what I hate about mops. And here's why this mop is better than all the mops I've tried. And, the difference between Joy doing this for her own product and a celebrity spokesperson doing it was that Joy seemed more relatable to the people who were watching. So you can kind of, a few different examples here, but all of them go to show you that this idea of values and tone can be represented in a lot of ways, including in spokespeople. And as we go through the different modules here, I think you're going to see a lot more ways that they filter in. One more thing that I wanted to give you an example of is just that, sometimes we'll see companies that are able to share points of difference from other companies, and they can do that by making decisions about values and tone and what they are and are not willing to say. I think about Avis having the slogan, "We try harder." There's a a sort of unspoken knock on their competitors here. We try harder than what? You might be thinking, like, than your competitors? We try harder than who? But they haven't said it. They've made decisions about how far they are or are not willing to go in their marketing, and they set their limits, even with a tagline that they could sort of adhere to long term. All of this is extension of values and tone. Now, all of this is only as good as actually getting your audience's attention. So I wanted to ask you this question. How much time do you think you have to get your audience's attention? If you're on with me live, feel free to jump into the chat and give me your thoughts about how much time you think you have to get your audience's attention when you're marketing to them. How much time any of these companies have when they're marketing. And as responses start to come in, we're definitely getting a sense here. We've gotten everywhere from seconds. Okay, so like 2 to 10 seconds is the range that I'm seeing so far in the chat. Definitely 10 seconds or less. Okay, yeah. I mean, now 10 seconds, I think it depends on what type of marketing you're looking at, right? There are all different ways that people market and advertise to us. Some we might have a longer time span for than others. But if we think about it in terms of, let's say, social media, if you're scrolling through social media, let's say you're on your phone, you're scrolling, through any social media platform, how long do you spend looking at any one post before you make a decision whether you want to stop on it or not? There might be some that you're looking at 1 or 2 seconds. Um, if you even registered it, you might instantly forget that you saw it because you went past it so quickly. If you're driving on the road and you see a billboard, maybe you look at that a little bit longer. So I like this range that you've all given me. I think there's truth to that range. And in some cases, on in some mediums, the answer is really bleak, right? So if you're marketing to people, how do you get their attention quickly enough? We need to use as many psychological cues as we possibly can to get this across the line. So I'm going to show you a bunch of them, sort of maybe not rapid fire here, but we'll go through them fairly quickly to give you a sense. The first tool that you have, and a really important one, is color. I know that some people are color blind, they cannot see color, but for those who can, color means something. Color, you've had a lifetime of people marketing to you or associating certain things with certain colors. And for us as business owners, we're not going to change that by making new decisions regarding our own marketing. It's best to lean into it culturally. So what I've got here is a composite of a variety of different color charts and meaning, um, color meaning sites and resources, and I've combined them into one graphic. This is very American focused. So if you find yourself marketing to other countries, you're going to want to look up color choices for those other countries and what those colors significance actually is. But this starts to give you a sense, like, are you happy with what these colors say? And these are certainly very broad strokes, but it starts to give you a sense, am I leaning into the right messages, even from the color choices? Or if you're at a point where you can decide for the first time what color choices you're going to make, go with something that is saying the thing that you already want it to say, and you'll probably find more success with it along the way. And again, as I move through these particular slides, you may want these resources for later. You will get the whole slide deck later, and I'll share that link with you later. So you can spend some time looking through all of these resources and thinking about it for your business. But just as some examples, think about choices some other companies make. Like Nickelodeon has for a long time leaned into the color orange, right? And orange itself has a lot of meaning. It's playful and fun. And they also lean into that in the graphic representations of how they've written their name. Like these are different iterations of what we've seen from Nickelodeon over time, and all of them are still playing with fun. The big bubbly letters, the splat, it all goes with playful and fun, but it started with a color that they leaned into. And that goes to show you as well that imagery is important as well. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? When I look at a picture like this and I think it's so incredibly clever because in seconds they associate two brands with each other. This is from a Starbucks ad from way back related to a thing that was being marketed around Star Wars. And Starbucks clearly didn't want to have any licensing infringement. So they very creatively conjured the idea of Star Wars without breaking any rules. You know, they just put their cups in front of a backdrop of space. They lit their straws up a little bit like lightsabers. Like they found a way, they're dueling, they found a way to automatically call in a Star Wars audience and to do it in a way that probably wouldn't get them sued later. And it all happens in a quick image that you can process quickly. Whereas something like this, you know, if you remember back in the day, those album covers, you know, like they would make them so intricate, the artwork would be so carefully thought out, because the longer you spent holding that album in your hands when you were in the record store, the more likely you would be to buy it and to walk away and actually put money down for it. So I think about an album cover like this, and look how much there is in there. You know, there's so much to look at. And so the more time you spend looking at this, the more likely you are to buy it. And you can definitely see companies that still use those principles now, like things like I think Coca-Cola and Cheerios, I think they found different ways to have like labels on their packaging, like people's names or people's like relationships with each other, so that you're sifting through all their products looking for the one with your name on it. Again, you spend time with the product. And it's all imagery, right? It's all part of the psychology of it. Now, when you're going to put words on anything that are written, font is another tool that we have, and font is not the words themselves, but how they are written. And there's meaning in that, right? So here are 5 different categories of font type. And the first one there on the left, serif. These are more formal. They have those little hooks on the end of all the letters. You tend to see this in printed word and tradition and novels, things like that. Whereas sans serif is a little cleaner. It doesn't have those little hooks on the end. So you'll more often see that in web content. Script, a lot of different varieties of script, but they are all fancier and more elegant. Some people associate them with invitations. They can be, it's not the easiest thing for the eye to process and read. So some people get really careful about when and how they use it and how much of it they use. And the same thing could be said for display or decorative fonts. So this one that I've chosen here feels kind of like a Halloween font to me, but they tend to be very bold. They're a little out there. They're very expressive. A lot of times people will use them for headlines and then something a little bit more simple and clean in the body of the content because they might want it to be more legible. It just depends on, there's a big variety of display and decorative fonts. So it just depends on what you're looking at there. And then we've got these modern fonts that tend to be the type of thing that a graphic designer will lean into. And they tend to be a little bit cooler, a little more progressive, a little more stylish. So I tend to use a lot of modern fonts in my materials. So, all of this, again, it's not the words you're saying, it's how they're written. Now, I'm giving you all of these examples of these quick cues you can give to people, and I want to show you how it can all hang together to create completely different messages. So all of these images say Friday the 13th, but they all feel like they're saying something completely different, don't they? Right? Because they look different. The top one there, I associate that with horror, with a horror film maybe. And it's because of the font that's chosen, that sort of nails on a chalkboard font. It's because of the bloody 13 that's dripping. The black, the white, the red, really stark color choices. If you go to the bottom left, that feels like a Jane Austen novel. It's very, very formal, very floral. Bottom right feels like a kid's party, and they show that in so many different ways. The sort of the bigger lettering, the brighter color choices, the balloons, all of these things say Friday the 13th, but they feel like they're saying something different to us. And the trick here is thinking, well, which one does your eye gravitate towards? And that says something about what you're interested in. And which ones did it not gravitate towards? Which one were you leaning away from? So you can see how important all these cues can be in calling us in. A few other things to think about with this: shape goes a long way as well. Squares, they tend to be more like they're boxes. They tend to be more about order and logic. Triangles tend to be energy symbols or power symbols. They can be considered more masculine, whereas a circle tends to be more about connection and community. They can be considered more feminine. You'll see a lot of nonprofits will go with circle logos because they want to call in a whole community. So these things, again, shape is another thing that you can add to the visuals. And, when I showed you that previous slide with the Friday the 13th, that was about saying, what do you call yourself into quickly? But some people, when they design logos or when they design imagery, they'll go a step further and they'll insert subliminal messages in, which is usually to do with the shape that goes in. So for example, FedEx, this seems like a really simple logo. It just seems like it's the word FedEx. But actually, between the E and the X, there's this negative space, that white negative space. It's a forward pointing arrow. And what does that tell you as an audience, as somebody in the audience, as a potential customer of FedEx? It's saying something: proceed with FedEx, go forward. It's trying to get in there in some way, and it doesn't even look like that type of thing is in there. But now that you see it, you might never unsee it. Here's my favorite logo, Tostitos. So I don't know if you've seen this before, but that TIT in the middle has actually two people holding a chip in the air getting ready to dunk it into salsa. They have promoted two products in their logo, and they've associated it with community and friendship and this social atmosphere. They've done it all in this logo. And their logo does some other things too. If you think back to all of those, the color choices, the font choices, they've made a lot of really specific choices with this to call people in as quickly as they can. And they've even got this subliminal message in there to help get it across the line for them. So these are all some ways to capture your audience's attention. And then how do you hold it? You know, things like people say this, have great content, have things they actually want to hear. Um, that will hopefully keep them, they'll stay with you and hopefully come back to you later. Consistency in your keywords is another thing that's important. And we'll talk about this in a bit. And then also, you don't just have to keep them on this one message. You could try to get them to the next message that from you that this links to. So it could be this question of, well, you're looking at this. Have you seen this? And have you seen this? And have you seen this? So the longer you can keep them on this message, and then the longer you can keep them with you in general, the better off you are because they haven't walked away from hearing from you yet. They're more likely to remember you for later or to buy something from you or to recommend you. Now, of course, all of this is well and good if you're in front of the right people. So how do you make sure you get in front of the right people? And this is something that's a much bigger conversation. And this is the type of thing that we do tend to talk about when we talk about brand and target market and tactically how you get in front of them. But message placement is something that I wanted to make sure I addressed at least a little bit here. So I do want to ask for those who are on with me live, do you know who your target markets are? Is this something that you've actually thought about before, or is this something that you feel like you need to work on a bit more? I will say the ASB and I have done some target market specific conversations that you might want to check out, recordings of that if you don't feel like you know who your target markets are. But it's helpful just to have a sense of those who are here with me now. If you do kind of have an idea who these people are supposed to be, Nikki's saying screenwriters. Liz is saying, I know who they are, but maybe less informed on where they are. Andy's saying small business owners. That's a really, really broad target market, and that's probably something that can be divided up into many different levels, but is still a target market for sure. Okay, so we've got, women over 40 with chronic pain. So there's people on this call have definitely thought about it, at least somewhat so far. So that helps. If you kind of have a sense of who they are, you can start to do research on where they are. There is no just knowing where they are. There is research that usually needs to be done. Maybe you've already done it because you've been in the target market yourself, or maybe it's something you need to do for the first time. But placing your message in front of the people who are in your target market, or if you have multiple target markets, getting in front of all of them separately. I wanted to show you a few examples of companies where think about how they market to their people, and there's what the strategy is there. So a company like Domino's, they're trying to be accessible. They want their marketing to be in places where everyday people are going to see it. Think about the physical locations of the stores that you've seen. Think about where you see their marketing. I tend to see, I'm really, I really associate them with college campuses for some reason, because I find like they're always near college campuses in places where I've lived. But you can also see, like, are they putting coupons and penny saver type thing? Like, where are they marketing to people? And ideally, they're going to be marketing to people who are looking to spend this amount of money on food. So that's going to be where you see their marketing. They want it to be accessible to the right type of people. Whereas you see Rolls-Royce, a very different example that was, and okay, Nikki's saying you're right outside of every military installation I was at. Okay, there's clearly a strategy there, right? And I gave college as an example, you gave military. So there are different target markets that can have the association, and we might not even know to speak with each other, but we all have that association. Rolls-Royce is kind of the opposite, which is why I wanted to give this example back to back. Rolls-Royce tends to be much more exclusive because their product is exclusive, and so their marketing is exclusive. It's all about sort of that elite status. And so I don't often, unless I go hunting for Rolls-Royce examples, I don't tend to see Rolls-Royce marketing day to day. You might see them marketing through having a specific brand placement in a movie. Um, if you go to their website and you start hunting through it, they have some pretty incredible, very high production value marketing on there, but they're not trying to push it out to the world. They're trying to push it out to the people who are going to their site already. So you kind of have to go find them, or they're trying to be embedded in the community that you're in, if you are in the community they want to be in. And that's it. They don't care about reaching everybody the way Domino's might be trying to do. Now, let's talk about, what if you have multiple target markets? This question comes up for me all the time. Most businesses have more than one target market, and you can reach them all if you have the time and the energy and the money and the bandwidth, but you have to reach them with the message that's specific to them. So for this, I like to think of really any automobile company as a model for this. I happen to use Toyota. You could use just about any of them, because you've got this overall make, and they have an overarching umbrella brand, and then they've got models that they market to different types of people. So in this case, the Tundra, the Prius, the Sienna, you're not going to see one ad that has all of these things. You're going to see, in a specific TV program, they'll do a commercial about one of these things specific to the demographic that they think is watching that program. You'll see the same thing with magazines. You'll see the same wherever they're promoting their products. They're usually going to try to be demographic specific about which one they're showing to that audience. But they have all of these different products. They just think about who they put in front of, like which ones they put in front of which people at which times. And you can do the same thing with your brand as well. Now, all of this brings me to one more thing that I wanted to address, and I can't say it enough, repetition. Repetition patterns long-term memory. Again, a lot of people fight me on this. They'll say, I feel like I'm just going to bore my audience. I've been saying the same thing to them. And that's exactly what you want to do. You want to keep getting that message in front of them to become that repeating pattern for them. Think about the keywords that you're using for them. Think about the ways that you're hooking them, and how can you keep leveraging that? So some words that can trigger people and attract people to your brand are things like words from a brand statement. This is something that, for those who've seen me present before and talk about brand statements, this is when you dust off your brand statement. And if not, this is a great chance to go back to those recordings. The brand statements are who you serve and how you help those people. If you've thought about that language, keep using that when you market to people. Pain points. Pain points are a great way. Do you have trouble sleeping? Well, now if you have trouble sleeping, you're going to be listening to my message. And if you can keep reiterating that you're solving that problem or talking about that problem, people may be more likely to stay with you if they have that problem. Adjectives are another one. Sometimes you can call in a subset of the people that you want to talk to, like Jif. Choosy moms choose Jif. Okay, it's not just every mom, it's the choosy ones, the ones who really care about their kids' nutrition. They're calling in a subset of moms and just saying, do you want to be in that elite group? So these are words that can hook you in to trigger and attract you. And then also we think about what words sort of keep you there. I think about a company that leads with keywords. I think about Snickers. Boy, do they say hungry a lot. It happens a lot, and it's in their marketing, and they make it big, don't they? Look at these examples. Hungry is like more than double the size of every other word. You know, create my hungry meme. The more you look at the word hungry, the more likely you are to feel hungry, and then their product solves that problem for you. So that's an example of a company leaning into a word. Here's another one, Wheaties. champion. The number of times Wheaties has said champion over the years, I don't even know. They put champions on their box. They use taglines, awaken the champion within, breakfast of champions. They're not saying only Olympians can eat my cereal. They're saying awaken the champion within. You can be a champion just by eating our product. Do those spreadsheets today, but you started with Wheaties, so it's going to go really well for you. So they lean into a word that they've chosen that they want us to associate with their product. Think about any example of a jingle that got in your head and didn't come out for days on end. That is a company who's paid to have you now marketing for yourself. Their jingle got into your brain and your brain is now doing the marketing work for them. I can think of a couple different Folgers jingles that I've heard over the years. Um, One of them, the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. But they're a couple. They put a little investment into this, and then they hope that your brain is going to do the rest of the marketing work for them over time. And so, again, this is that principle of I want you to not only, it's not just me repeating my message to you and over. I want you repeating it to yourself now. It's really leveraging that pattern. So the more you can get people to really keep repeating your message in their brain, the better off you are, which is so hard to do if your message is always changing, which is why I keep coming back to this idea of consistency. Lean in to the decisions you've made, because if you've been following along, if you've been doing all the things that I've talked about here, if it starts with tone and values, and you've really thought about the language you're using, and you've really thought about the colors you're using and all the visuals, if you can keep at it with those things, people will start to expect that from you. And that's where the patterns begin. Not everybody can invest in a jingle. This is like the most elevated version, I would say, in terms of budget of the things that we've talked about today. But jingles are, for me, like the final example of why repetition and consistency work. And again, if you've ever had a jingle stuck in your head, you know why this is effective because you couldn't get it out of your head, and you probably went around singing it to everybody in your path. And think about how powerful that can be. So I wanted to make sure we covered a lot of ground, a lot of different examples here, all in the hopes that you would have at least a few examples that make you think, oh, I wonder if this might work for my business. Hopefully everybody's had different things like that have seemed appealing to them through this presentation. And the question is, how can you start leaning into that a little bit more in your marketing? So I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for questions here. So feel free to start getting questions into the chat. They can be very specific to your business if you'd like. And I think that can be helpful to other people, other business owners, regardless of their industry, just to hear the thought process and how we answer those questions. So here's some reminders of what we talked about. We talked about 6 overall SMART principles of marketing messaging. We talked a bit about showcasing what your brand represents through values and tone. We talked about capturing and holding your audience's attention. This was a lot of quick psychological visual tricks that we addressed. And then putting your message where your target market is in terms of, exclusive, accessible, or if you have multiple target markets. Then we talked a little bit about those patterns and the repetition and the long-term memory of it all. So those could be some areas that you might want to ask about in your questions. As you're getting your questions in, just so you know, there are a couple more presentations still to come. May 14th, we've got how to win at social media, even with no budget. August 13th, we've got a slightly longer presentation for pinpointing your perfect brand and target market. So if you were watching this one and you thought, I actually do need to work a bit more on my target markets, or your brand for that matter, that's going to be a really good one for you to attend, because we're going to get into a lot more of the details on that. And as I pause on this last slide for anybody to submit questions, I just wanted to let you know that top link is the link where you can access almost all of the resources for today, except for the recording that Julie is producing right now. And that second link is how you talk to the ASBTDC if you want to have a consultation or coaching session with them. So I'll turn it over to Julie, because you might want to talk more about that.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Just so that everyone knows, watch your email, because the link that Melissa has right here I'll be sending it to you through your email. And then again, you can always go to our website to check out our latest event schedule for the various trainings and webinars. You can go to our resources page where all of Melissa's webinars are posted on our resources page in the marketing and web resources tab. One thing that we do is because we present the most popular topics more than once, the recording that will go onto the website will be the latest one. So um, just know that the video that you'll be watching will be this latest presentation. The ASBTDC, we have offices in Fayetteville and Bentonville. We cover a 6-county area, so if you're not in Washington or Benton County, but in Carroll County, Newt County, we'd be happy to help you. We can meet with you over Zoom, by phone, or in person. So you get to choose how you meet with your consultant. Also, Melissa did present, she did note her upcoming webinar, so we'll look forward to that. If you have any questions, go ahead and get them in the chat now. And if not, we will go ahead and say thanks and close today's webinar.
And for those who are on with me live, I'd love to know of the many, many different types of things that we addressed today. Was there anything in particular that seemed particularly resonant for where you are in your business right now? I'm curious to know if there's anything that is particularly timely for you, or just feels like it's a thing that you want to be able to work on now. But I think there are a couple questions coming in here. I think, let's see, Michelle. I work with women over 40 with fibromyalgia. The color is purple for fibro, but I don't want to use the same as everyone. I have a Western glam vibe. I'm thinking greens. I work with neuroaesthetics. It's tricky, right? Well, first of all, purple, purple can be associated with all kinds of things in the medical field. I want to say is that pancreatic cancer awareness as
Mhm.
well. So there is, it's not the only health related reason to have purple. So I can appreciate wanting to differentiate. I would encourage you to loop purple in somewhere, even if it's not, it might be an accent color versus being like the main color that washes over you when you see something, just so people can sort of latch onto it at least a little bit. Because again, that is part of the culture around fibromyalgia that's been created far before you. So it helps to lean in. But if you think maybe you want to have a purple accent, then it becomes a question of what complements it well. And that's where you might look at color charts that a graphic designer might use of what pairs well with what. Green might work, but the question is, what shades are you looking at? And so I wouldn't get completely away from purple, but it doesn't have to be the entire picture of what you're looking at. Because again, you don't want to have to retrain an entire audience. It takes a lot of money to retrain people into understanding like what your colors are supposed to mean. So that's my 2 cents on that, Michelle. But thank you for that question. Let's
And
see.
Tiffany has a question. She said, I feel like I'm set on most everything except for locating my target market. Do you mean where physically my target market is young adult women looking for community in group fitness?
Great question, Tiffany. I do mean where they are physically. And that can be in a virtual setting or in real life setting. Um, that's something I'm going to dig into a lot more in that August presentation, I believe it'll be. So that might be worth looking at if you feel like you really want to spend more time thinking about that one. And I know that I've also delivered that for the ASBTDC in the past, so there might be a recording of that already up somewhere. But yeah, like it's all good to shout your message somewhere, but if you're shouting it in earshot of the people who are most likely to need group fitness, um, or if they're where you're most likely to reach those young adult women who are looking for group fitness in particular, then you're much more likely to have positive results from the marketing that you do, and it'll be more efficient and effective for the time and money that you spend marketing to them. So yes, definitely. It's, you know, a lot of people think, like, you go to social media, it's like, oh, well, this many people saw my message, a high volume. That's great, but I'm not as concerned about the volume as I am about who you got in front of. Um, if you can be really pinpointed, you're far more likely to have success with it. Let's see. Tina saying the purple and gray would look good. And I think that was related to Michelle's question. So we've got some people putting some design thoughts in there. I love it.
Okay, anything else, anyone that you want to ask before we close? So thank you for joining us today, and we will look forward to seeing you at our next marketing presentation with Melissa. Don't forget, check out the schedule on our website. There are lots of other topics that we present on, and we would love to help you, so stay in touch. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thank you all.